A routine walk, a racist cop, and a kick that sparked the war. She's pregnant and fearless, but can she expose a dark conspiracy before they silence her for good? You are about to witness the moment a man in uniform made an unforgivable error. He targeted a pregnant black woman, not knowing the strength that resided within her. In an idyllic suburban neighborhood, Officer Caldwell, a man sworn to protect, twisted his authority into a cruel weapon. He brutally shoved Amira, searched her without cause, and sneered as if she were dirt beneath his boot. But Amira, 7 months pregnant, with a backbone of steel and a history forged in shadows, was far more than he could ever imagine. Her single defiant kick to that racist officer's face wasn't merely self-defense. It was a thunderclap, a declaration of war. Amira's past held chilling secrets, secrets that could dismantle an entire corrupt system. Stay with us as we journey with her, from a simple sidewalk encounter to the heart of a powerful, sinister syndicate. Before the blaring sirens, before the shocking headlines, it began with a humble paper bag of prenatal vitamins in a quiet street that seemed to whisper, "Who belongs here, and who doesn't?" Amira Cole, a woman of grace and quiet strength, emerged from the community health clinic with the careful composure only expectant mothers truly understand. One hand instinctively cradled her growing belly, the other tightened around her bag. She crossed into the wealthier side of town, where lawns looked perfectly manicured and mailboxes gleamed with brass. Her steps were even, resolute. She had absolutely nothing to hide, but everything, her precious unborn child to protect. A police cruiser glided silently beside her, its engine a low growl like a throat clearing before an accusation. Sergeant Roy Caldwell stepped out, deliberately positioning himself between Amira and the warm sun. There was no greeting, no siren, just a cold, assessing stare that measured her worth and dismissed it instantly. "Afternoon," he drawled, twisting the word into a challenge. "We've had a report. Pregnant black female walking through here after leaving the clinic. Word is, pills go missing on days like this." Amira held her bag open, the vitamins clearly visible, prenatal vitamins, from the community clinic. "Here's my receipt." He didn't even glance at it. His chilling gaze lingered on her face, then her belly, before drifting past her to the stately homes, as if checking if anyone was watching. "You know," he added, his voice unnervingly light. "Folks around here like to feel safe, familiar. You get me." Amira met his gaze. "I get that I'm walking home from our clinic," he corrected, his tone possessive, as if the public owed him a personal debt. "Carrying a baby you probably can't even feed, just like the rest of your kind." The words were delivered with a practiced softness, gentle enough to deny their venom, yet sharp enough to draw blood. Amira felt a scorching heat rise her shoulder blades, then forcefully willed it down. "You are out of line, Sergeant." "Out of line," he echoed, a cruel grin tugging at his lips. "Let me help you back in. Bag and ID now." 2 houses down, a porch door creaked open. A middle-aged woman raised her phone, filming with both hands, bracing herself for the inevitable. Across the street, a young man in a baseball cap mirrored her, but he leaned casually against a mailbox, settling in for what he clearly viewed as a show. Amira handed over her bag. "You'll see vitamins in a pharmacy label." Caldwell rummaged through it until he found the bottle. He shook it once, rattling the pills like tiny bones for the camera, then tossed it back so carelessly that the seal split. He didn't bother to read the label. "License," he barked. Amira calmly took out her wallet. "You can run it. I am not consenting to a search." "There's your first mistake." He stepped closer, the shadow of his hat falling across her eyes like a grim premonition. "Out here I decide what's consent." The woman on the porch finally found her voice. "Officer, she's pregnant. Don't touch her. I'm recording." Caldwell didn't even look her way. "Put the phone down, ma'am, or you'll be spending the night in county on obstruction." The threat cracked through the air like a whip. The young man snorted. "Better do what he says, lady. He's just doing his job." "Is he?" The woman shot back, her voice shaky but growing louder. "Because his job isn't to humiliate people." Caldwell repositioned himself, trapping Amira between his squad car and a white picket fence. "Hands on the pickets," he ordered. "Let's keep this smooth." "No," Amira stated, her voice neither loud nor shaky but firm. "You have my ID. Run it." His jaw worked, a muscle twitching. "You don't belong on this side of the street, Miss Cole. You're drawing attention." "I am a patient who walked out of a public clinic," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I belong anywhere my feet can carry me." He moved with sudden speed, catching her wrist. Not enough force to bruise, just the chilling touch of ownership. She didn't flinch away. She held his stare until his fingers tightened, because he could feel she wasn't shrinking. "Here's the situation," he murmured, his breath hot with coffee and twisted power. We've had theft, we've had resales. You match the description, and you're out of place. That's probable cause for me. What you have is a stereotype and a sidewalk, she countered, her voice steady. Neither is cause. He laughed once. A humorless bark. Then he yanked the bag from her fingers and callously dumped it. Vitamins scattered across the pristine grass like confetti from a parade gone terribly wrong. He then deliberately planted his boot on her receipt. Littering now, he declared, a smirk on his face. Progress. Pick it up, she commanded, her voice still impossibly level. It's evidence of your mistake. From the porch, the woman called out again. My name is Ruth, and I'm recording this, Sergeant Caldwell. Every single word. Now he finally turned, his eyes narrowed to slits. Ruth, you're one warning away. Put the phone down. She didn't, though her hands trembled. The young man Liam shifted his weight, raising his voice. Ma'am, let the officer do his job. If she's clean, she's clean. This isn't about clean. Ruth snapped, her voice now steadier. It's about dignity. Amira's chin rose a fraction. And it's about the law. Caldwell stepped into her personal space, the vinyl of his vest brushing against her fabric. Turn around, hands on the fence. I'm not turning, she asserted. You won't lay me out like a suspect just because I'm black and visible. His cheek twitched, the cruel smile vanished. Wrong answer. He reached for the back of her neck, the way men often do when they view a body as merely a handle. Amira angled her shoulder just enough, making his grip slip. He caught only air and a surge of irritation. The porch creaked ominously. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The entire block seemed to hold its breath. Last chance, he snarled. I already told you no. The word hung in the air. Settling, growing heavy, he seized her tote bag by its strap and ripped it. The paper split with a dull, sickening sound. He watched the vitamins scatter again, as if the chaos somehow validated his twisted actions. Then his gaze climbed back, finding her eyes still steady, unwavering. Proud, aren't you? He sneered. Correct, she answered, her voice a quiet challenge. He lunged that critical half-inch closer, and in that split second, his mask of authority completely shattered. Caldwell's free hand shot up, his weapon held sideways, and he brutally drove the butt of his service pistol hard into Amira's shoulder. It was a precise, punishing blow, the kind meant to teach permanent, crippling lessons. In that very instant, Amira's instincts roared to life. The blow landed, and the world around her sharpened with terrifying clarity. Pain seared through Amira's shoulder, but the fear he craved never materialized. She exhaled once, letting years of training settle into muscle memory, and shifted to protect her belly. Her left foot slid. She pivoted tightly on the ball of her heel and drove a compact arc forward. Her heel met cartilage with a flat, sickening crack. Caldwell's head snapped back, his cap flying through the air. He crashed to the pavement, his breath expelled in a ragged gasp. The gun skittered from his hands, sliding toward the curb. For a single suspended second, the entire block froze, an old, cruel script misfiring in the harsh daylight. Ruth gasped. Oh my God. Her phone, still recording, never left the frame. Liam's mouth hung open. No way, he whispered in disbelief. Amira didn't press her advantage. She squared her stance, breathing deeply through the fresh ache in her shoulder. Do not reach for that weapon, she commanded, her voice level and firm. Caldwell struggled to sit up, blood trickling from his nose. The first sound he made wasn't human language. The second was a guttural snarl. You, he spat. You're under arrest for existing, Amira countered, her voice laced with chilling calm. For vitamins? He fumbled twice for his radio, his thumb hitting the wrong button. The third time it connected. Unit 4. Officer assaulted. Send. The radio screeched, then died. Across the street, a porch camera's red LED blinked twice and went dark. The city pole cam at the corner flashed, then blacked out entirely. Ruth saw both instances and felt her stomach churn with dread. Did you see that? She cried. The camera's just... Amira registered it, but kept her eyes fixed on the man sprawled on the concrete. Stay with me, Ruth. Keep recording. Caldwell rolled to an elbow, waving an empty hand. You think this ends here? He rasped, his voice full of menace. You think you get to walk away? Amira crouched only long enough to gather her torn receipt and the vitamin bottle, never turning her back. I live here, she stated simply. He spat red. Animal. Mother, she corrected him, her voice holding an unwavering dignity. Liam slowly lowered his phone, shame washing over him like a cold draft. He glanced uncertainly up the street, as if hoping a door might open and offer him an easy escape. I'm out, he muttered, sliding away along a hedge. Ruth, however, stood her ground. Her voice trembled, but it carried. They won't leave her alone, she whispered, more to the recording than to anyone brave enough to hear. Amira, back up your video now. To the cloud, not just the device. Ruth nodded, her thumb moving rapidly across her screen. A small progress bar crept across the display on the pavement. Caldwell fought to his knees, his cheekbone already beginning to swell. He reached for the curb where his pistol had landed, only to scrape his knuckles. "Get back here," he barked. "I'm giving you a lawful order." "You gave me an unlawful beating," Amira retorted. "We're even on orders." Windows in nearby houses cracked open, then quickly closed. A garage door hummed down. Suburbia practiced its silence. "I said," he coughed, desperately groping for his lost authority. "You're under—" "No," Amira interrupted. "I'm leaving." She turned, her movements unhurried, devoid of taunting. Every step was measured, deliberate. Halfway down the block, she paused, pressing a palm to the persistent ache in her shoulder, then continued her walk. Behind her, Caldwell found his voice again, a guttural roar. "You walk away and I will bury you," he bellowed, his voice raw, cratered by pain and blood. "You hear me?" Amira didn't look back. Ruth flinched at the threat, glanced from the dead cameras to the live phone in her hands. The upload crawled agonizingly toward completion. A dark sedan idled at the corner, its tinted glass concealing everything but a silhouette that turned briefly towards the scene. Then away. The porch camera remained dark. Someone had flipped a switch and vanished without a trace. Caldwell slumped against his cruiser, spitting another string of red. "You're finished," he groaned. "Only if we stop watching," Ruth murmured, her breath fogging her screen. The upload hit a quiet chime like a lifeline sounded. Ruth immediately sent a second copy of the video to her sister out of state, then, with a trembling pen, scrawled the time on a sticky note. Down the block, Amira adjusted the torn strap of her bag, took one deep, fortifying breath, and squared her shoulders. She reached the end of the block and finally turned. She didn't wave, she didn't speak, but her posture conveyed what words could not. "I am not your property." Then she disappeared around the hedge, leaving the street to reassemble its fragile lies without her. A distant siren wailed, late and theatrical. Caldwell lifted his radio, receiving only dead air. He stared at it, bewildered, as if loyalty itself had betrayed him. Ruth lowered her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She whispered once more, a bare sound. They won't leave her alone. By the time Amira reached the corner, ache in her shoulder finally became impossible to ignore. She pressed a palm to the small riot beneath her ribs, feeling an older, deeper pain rise, the unspoken inheritance of every black mother. She saw her grandmother's church hat at a boy's funeral, the names whispered in hushed kitchens that never reached the evening news, the countless porches where mothers rehearsed the talk, eyes forward, hands open. How to survive a police stop? What wisdom would she impart to this child? To lower their voice so another man's pulse could remain steady, to memorize badge numbers without anyone seeing. No, she yearned for more than mere survival. She wanted doctor visits free from suspicion, a school where her child was called by their name, not a stereotype, a sidewalk where prenatal vitamins weren't probable cause for humiliation. The distant siren still wailed, thin and theatrical. Amira leaned into the sound, making a silent, ironclad promise. "You will not inherit my fear. You will inherit my fight." That night, as the world slept, Amira heard footsteps on her porch. The first sound was wrong for that hour, metal brushing metal. Her eyes snapped open. The wall clock's hands glowed. 2:03 a.m. The street outside was eerily quiet, but the faint click of a latch giving way sliced through the silence. She swung her legs over the bed, every nerve tightening. The back door eased open, hinges sighing like a ghost. "Who's there?" Her voice was sharp, unafraid. A towering shadow crossed the kitchen, blocking the faint light from the street lamp. Sergeant Roy Caldwell stepped forward, his eyes colder than the night air, his breath carrying the stale, bitter bite of liquor. "You thought walking away made you safe?" he asked, almost conversationally. "You humiliated me. I can't let that stand." "I defended myself," she replied, her voice steady as a rock. "Leave now, and maybe you keep your badge." His smile was jagged, menacing. "You think that badge keeps me from anything?" He lunged. His forearm slammed across her collarbone, driving her violently against the wall. One hand clamped around her throat, the other braced for leverage. His weight pressed down, relentlessly forcing the breath from her lungs. Amira's hands shot up, not to pry his fingers, but to seize his wrist and pivot. She dropped her center of gravity, twisting sharply. His grip loosened, his balance shattered. She hooked his arm, torqued it behind him, and used the wall to pin his shoulder blade. Caldwell growled through clenched teeth. "You think you're tough?" She leaned into the hold, Tough enough to end this before it even starts. He slammed the back of his head toward her face. She dodged, but the distraction worked. He wrenched free, staggering a step. Then, a chilling glint of steel appeared in his hand. A serrated combat knife. "You won't be testifying," he snarled, the blade leveling towards her belly. Her body moved before thought. She sidestepped, knocking his knife hand upward with her forearm. The blade scraped the ceiling, showering plaster dust. She tried to kick the weapon away, but Caldwell twisted, slashing down. The point sliced her sleeve, grazing her skin. Her heel caught on the rug. She went down hard. Caldwell's boots closed the distance in 2 predatory strides. "Last breath," he hissed. Suddenly, the kitchen door exploded inward. Ethan Ward, broad-shouldered, his eyes locked on the danger, burst in. His hand clamped Caldwell's wrist before the blade could even drop. The knife clattered to the floor. "Get off her," Ethan barked, shoving Caldwell back. Recognition flickered in Caldwell's eyes. "So, the husband finally shows?" "You're trespassing," Ethan stated, stepping between them. "And you just tried to kill a pregnant woman. That's life in prison." Caldwell swung wildly. Ethan slipped the punch, drove his shoulder into Caldwell's ribs, forcing him violently into the counter. The coffee pot shattered to the floor. Amira scrambled up, kicking the knife under the stove. Caldwell roared, twisting free. He rammed Ethan into the refrigerator, denting the metal with a sickening thud. Ethan caught the edge of the counter, spun, and landed a clean elbow to Caldwell's jaw. The sergeant reeled, but his hand shot to his belt for something else. A collapsible baton. "Stay down," Ethan snapped. But Caldwell flicked the baton open with a practiced snap. They circled each other. Caldwell swung. Ethan ducked and slammed a brutal fist into his gut. Caldwell doubled over. Amira, keeping to the side, spotted her opening. She grabbed Caldwell's free wrist, yanked it back, and locked it in place. An armbar tight enough to make tendons strain. Caldwell's baton hit the floor. "Let go," he barked. Ethan moved in to cuff him with a zip tie from his pocket. But Caldwell twisted, wrenching his arm out. In that motion, his jacket sleeve rolled up, exposing the inside of his wrist. There it was, an inked emblem. A coiled serpent, wrapped around a gavel, flanked by 2 block letters. Amira froze. Recognition hitting her like a bolt of ice. She'd seen it before on a confidential case file marked for internal threat assessment. It was the insignia of a clandestine fraternity within law enforcement, one connected to brutality cases buried in sealed archives. Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Ethan, look." He glanced, his eyes narrowing. "It's them." Caldwell frantically yanked his arm down, trying to hide the tattoo. "You don't know what you're looking at." "Oh, I know exactly," Amira stated, her tone cutting through the room like a razor. Caldwell saw the profound change in her eyes, the shift from a mere neighbor he could intimidate to something else entirely, something formidable. "Who are you?" he stammered, backing toward the door. "No one you can threaten," she replied. Ethan stepped forward. "Leave now. You'll answer for this." "Every part of it." Caldwell's breathing was ragged, his pride more deeply wounded than his body. "You've got no idea how far this goes," he warned, his voice low and menacing. Then he slipped into the dark, vanishing between the streetlight. The silence that followed was brittle, fragile. Amira turned to Ethan. "We can't wait, that mark. It's in the file. The closed case out of Wilmington." Ethan nodded once grimly. "Then we're done hiding." They both understood the profound implication. The comforting cover of an ordinary marriage was gone. They were back to being what they had been all along. FBI operatives, embedded in hostile territory, relentlessly tracking the roots of a network designed to remain untouchable. The couple immediately began tracing the origins of that sinister secret fraternity. By the following morning, the fear had transformed, settling not into panic but into cold, sharp precision. Amira sat in the back of a waiting room that reeked of lemon-scented denial, staring at her hands clasped over her stomach. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and children's laughter echoed from the pediatric wing, as if mocking the quiet dread clinging to her breath. Ethan waited outside the exam room, alert and unreadable, while Amira was led inside. Dr. Lena Hamilton was already there, hands clasped at the edge of the table, her eyes heavy with an unspoken sorrow. Dr. Hamilton, in her late 50s, her white coat pristine, looked as though she had aged a decade in the past 2 months alone. "Miss Cole," she greeted gently, then corrected herself. "Amira, I've reviewed your charts. Baby's heart rate is strong, growth is consistent, and your blood pressure is surprisingly steady given—" She trailed off, studying Amira intently. Amira didn't smile. "Given what?" Dr. Hamilton closed the file. Given everything you're carrying, that doesn't show up in a chart. For a long moment, only the soft tick of the wall clock filled the silence. Then Dr. Hamilton pulled the blinds shut, her fingers lingering on the cord. I shouldn't say what I'm about to say. It will cost me more than just my job. I don't need reassurances, Dr. Hamilton, Amira replied, her voice low and firm. I need the truth. The doctor sat down, folding her hands in her lap as if to steady herself. You're not the only black woman who's walked into this clinic worried for more than just the pregnancy. But the others, they didn't make it this far. Amara's breath hitched in her throat. What do you mean? Dr. Hamilton glanced at the door. 6 months ago, I treated a woman named Clarice. Second trimester, no complications, healthy vitals. 2 weeks later, she was arrested on an unpaid fine. 3 days after that, she was gone. A miscarriage. In custody. No autopsy. Amira leaned forward. And no one raised questions? They signed it off as spontaneous loss due to stress. But I've seen stress. I've seen women crushed by poverty, addiction, neglect, and still carry full term. Her jaw tightened. What I'm seeing now isn't just hardship, it's erasure. A chilling silence stretched between them. Amira's eyes darkened. How many? Dr. Hamilton hesitated, then shook her head. Too many. And the chart notes, they vanish, adjusted, rewritten. Sometimes they don't even match the blood work I ran. Who's doing this? Amira demanded. That's when Dr. Hamilton looked at her, really looked, for a long time, then slowly said, I don't know exactly, but I've heard rumors about a network inside the force. Quiet, old, protected. I've seen officers linger outside my office, who had no business in OBGYN corridors. You think it's the police? Dr. Hamilton didn't nod. She didn't have to. I've also seen representatives from a pharmaceutical group I won't name come through these halls asking questions, offering partnerships. I declined. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They didn't like that. Amira swallowed hard. Why tell me this? Dr. Hamilton stood, crossed the room and gently touched Amira's shoulder. Because you haven't flinched once since you sat down, and because you carry yourself like a woman who already knows the fire is coming. Amira held her gaze. I do. Neither woman spoke the word investigation. Neither had to. I'm not asking you to blow this wide open, Dr. Hamilton added, her voice softer now. I'm asking you to stay alive. Because whoever's doing this, they're watching, and they're waiting for women like you to get too close. Amira stood as well. That's the problem, Dr. Hamilton. I think I'm already too close. That was the last time anyone saw Dr. Lena Hamilton alive. The next morning, her car was found mangled against a tree just 2 blocks from her home. The passenger side crumpled like paper, airbags never deployed. Police quickly called it an accident. Faulty brakes, rain-slicked roads. A closed case within hours. No autopsy, but at her office, hidden beneath a stack of prenatal folders marked for shredding, Ethan found it. A nondescript manila envelope, unlabeled, deliberately ordinary. Inside were printed medical records, timelines, names, dozens of them, all black women. All deceased, all pregnant while incarcerated. All listed with complications as their cause of death. Ethan handed it to Amira without a word. She scanned the files in silence, then stopped, her eyes locking onto one name, Clarice. She was real, Amira whispered. Ethan nodded, and she wasn't alone. Beneath each file was a symbol, like a rubber-stamped signature. At first glance, it appeared bureaucratic, but Amira instantly recognized the shape. A small gavel wrapped in a coiled snake, the very same symbol Caldwell had tattooed under his sleeve. Her voice came out as a horrified whisper. It's them. They've made it medical, Ethan said grimly. Sanitized it, institutionalized it. Amira looked up from the files, the grief in her face hardening into something else. Absolute resolve. They're burying mothers, she said, her voice quiet, but efficient. Erasing their names and blaming their bodies. Ethan didn't blame. Then we tear the veil off. Amira nodded. She tucked the file back into the envelope, then secured it in a locked drawer at the back of their closet. She turned to Ethan. We start with the ones no one else remembered. Amira and Ethan committed themselves to uncovering the roots of this secret fraternity. The county courthouse records office, a place long forgotten by time, perhaps deliberately so, creaked with sun-faded signs and rusted hinges. The stale scent of mold and decaying paper enveloped Amira and Ethan the moment they stepped inside. Fluorescent bulbs flickered in protest, casting a sickly yellow light across file drawers that hadn't been opened in years. It wasn't on any official list. That was their first red flag. Ethan pushed past a leaning stack of tax ledgers, leading her down the main aisle. The place felt like a mausoleum for forgotten truths, row after row of death certificates, case notes, prison logs. Each sheet, a bureaucratic layer designed to blur reality into silence. Near the back, seated behind a steel desk warped with moisture, was a man the locals whispered about but never named. The court archivist. He had white hair, hands gnarled with arthritis, and a stitched scar that ran from the corner of his mouth to his collarbone. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. Amira extended her badge, not her public one, but a discreet flash of her true identity. He blinked once, then slowly stood and shuffled to a drawer marked DCP, death certificates, prisoners. He unlocked it without a word. No questions, no protest. Just quiet obedience. "Thank you," Amira said softly, watching his trembling hands. The man didn't respond. The file folders were brittle, stained by time, and perhaps by untold secrets. She pulled the first one, Clarice Bell. The cause of death was printed in bold letters, pulmonary embolism, natural causes, but the autopsy photos, barely visible in grainy black and white, told an entirely different story. Bruising along the wrists, defensive wounds across the forearms, a deep purple mark at the base of the neck. Amira traced a finger down the notes. No mention of trauma, no toxicology report, no incident report. Ethan leaned in. "Same pattern in the others," he murmured. She opened the next, and the next, and the next. Different names, the same chilling silence. The same sanitized phrase, natural causes. But these weren't natural deaths, Amira declared, her voice filled with a quiet fury. These were executions behind locked doors, rewritten with polite ink. She paused, letting her eyes fall shut. In that moment her mind didn't drift to classified files, or the urgency of her mission drifted to faces, to women like Clarice, women like herself, who had once lain in sterile rooms, bellies full with life, dreams still breathing, only to be buried beneath a cause of death that was a blatant lie. Amira sank back into the cracked leather chair, her hand instinctively covering her own stomach. She felt the gentle flutter of her child, soft, innocent, utterly unaware of the storm raging around them both. And for a brief second, she couldn't breathe, not from fear but from a grief so sharp it bordered on pure rage. "These women never had a chance," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, and nobody even bothered to lie convincingly. The archivist flinched, just slightly. Amira turned to him. "You knew them, didn't you?" He didn't nod, but his eyes dropped to the floor. Ethan stepped closer. "What happened to your voice?" The man opened his mouth, but nothing came out, just a rasp of air, and the tremble of ruined vocal cords. A single tear slid down his cheek, disappearing into the stubble of his jaw. Amira didn't press him. She couldn't. Instead, she wrote down the case numbers, collected the copies, and stood. "Thank you for preserving this," she said, her voice filled with profound gratitude. Even when they tried to erase it, the man raised a shaky hand and placed it over his heart. A silent, poignant gesture. Outside, dusk was settling over the town, a violet haze creeping along the rooftops. As they got into their car, Ethan drove. Amira sat silent in the passenger seat, the file on her lap like a lead weight. Her phone buzzed. No caller ID, no ringtone, just a single ominous vibration. She opened the message. One line, "Stop or you'll join them." Her stomach churned, but she didn't flinch. She handed the phone to Ethan. He read it, didn't speak, just nodded the way soldiers nod before returning to war. But Amira stared at the message longer, not out of fear but because of the pronoun them. Not her, not Amira, them, the women, the ones whose names had been rewritten. Amira closed her eyes, her hand resting over her child again. "I won't stop," she said, her voice low and determined. "They've killed too many." Ethan pulled into a side street, parking beside an old barber shop with boarded windows. "You think it's someone inside the bureau?" "I think it's older than the bureau," she murmured, "and bigger than the precinct." As they exited the car, Amara's phone buzzed again. No text, just coordinates. She clicked the link. An abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town. No name, no sign, just a pulsing pin on a map, like a grim heartbeat. The message had led them to a forgotten place, a place that held either answers or another body waiting to be named. The wind by the river moved like it carried ghosts, slow, whispering, unsettled. A broken lamppost buzzed overhead in the cracked asphalt lot, its dying bulb blinking sporadically, like a heart struggling to remember how to live. The gravel crunched under Ethan's boots as he scanned the shadows, his body tense, fingers hovering near his hip. Amira walked half a step behind him, her hand never far from the taser stitched into the inside of her coat. the other protectively resting over the curve of her belly. They were alone, until they weren't. A car door clicked open from behind a stack of rusted shopping cart. The sound was deliberate, too soft for a threat, too loud for carelessness. A figure stepped into the dim glow. Miguel Santiago, the man announced, lifting his hands slowly. Palms out. Don't shoot. I'm the reason you're not dead already. Amira tilted her head, cautious yet cuey. He was younger than she expected. Early 30s, perhaps. His skin was weathered from long nights, and even longer betrayals. His badge wasn't visible, but something in his posture made it clear he had once believed in the system too. Prove it, Ethan demanded, his voice flat. Miguel reached into his jacket and pulled out an ID card wrapped in a cracked leather wallet. FBI clearance, an undercover designation burned at the edges. It hadn't been officially used in years. I was part of Operation Lucent Echo, he explained, tasked to investigate corruption in small-town law enforcement. Never in a million years did I think I'd find a goddamn eugenics cult disguised as a public health initiative. Amira's eyes sharpened. Miguel looked at her, and something broke in his voice. My wife's name was Tiana. She was 6 months pregnant, arrested for resisting a traffic stop. Wrong place, wrong skin. I wasn't even told until she was already in the morgue. He paused, his jaw trembling. Cause of death? Placental abruption. Natural causes, just like the others. No one spoke for a moment. The wind carried the stench of river silt and rotting wood, thick with the grief of generations. I tried to blow the whistle, Miguel continued. Got reassigned, then suspended, then lost in the system. Have you ever been erased while still breathing? That's what they do to cops like me. And you? Ethan's eyes narrowed. You sent the text? Miguel nodded. I've been tracking the names on those files. I couldn't act until someone else started shaking the tree. That was you. Amira stepped forward. What is this group really? The tattoos, the records, the silence. Who's backing this? Miguel reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrinkled photograph. It showed Caldwell in uniform, years younger, flanked by a group of officers, all white, all smiling. But at the center, their wrists, deliberately exposed, bore matching tattoos. A triangle split by a vertical line, the same one Amira had seen on Caldwell's wrist. It started in the academy, Miguel revealed. Caldwell was my instructor. Strict, brutal, but revered. He handpicked certain recruits, gave them extra shifts, special assignments. I thought he was grooming leaders. He was grooming monsters. Ethan took the photo. Military or intelligence? Miguel shook his head. Private funding. A pharmaceutical company. Deep pockets. Deeper shadows. They test on inmates, mostly black and brown women. The sick ones get shuffled into ghost wards. No files, no phone calls. They just disappear. And the babies? Amira asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Miguel didn't answer. He just looked away. The silence between them heavier than the night itself. Then he turned back, his gaze resolute. Whatever you're planning, stop. Tonight, they're moving. I intercepted a communication signal. Encrypted shortwave. Someone greenlit a hit. You're the target. Amira didn't flinch. How many? At least 3, maybe more. They won't come as cops. No uniforms. Just force. No witnesses. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes burning. Why warn us? Miguel hesitated. Because I'm tired of saving evidence after the body's cold. And because I watched my wife die on a grainy monitor, and I couldn't reach her in time. I won't let that happen again. A train groaned in the distance. The blinking streetlight went dark for a second too long. Amira exhaled slowly, letting the fear settle into sharp focus. Then we prep. You know their playbook. Miguel nodded grimly. Every dirty trick in it. Amira stepped forward, extending her hand. Then welcome to the other side. He hooked it, calloused palm to calloused palm. As they walked back to their vehicles, Miguel spoke without turning his head. They'll use the neighbor, the young white one. Liam. He always hangs around, pretends to care. He's the type they turn first. Soft loyalty, easy to harden. Watch him. Amira looked back at the river, its silence stretching like a grave warning. We will. They split off in separate cars. No words, no headlights. Only grim resolve. They had only one chance to strike first, before the system struck back harder and erased them, just as it had so many others. The wind had shifted. Amira felt it before the locks clicked, before the lights cut out, before Miguel even whispered, "They're here." The house had been stripped of warmth. Every bulb unscrewed, save one in the hallway. Every window darkened with blackout film. The baby monitor in the bedroom buzzed quietly. Ethan had modified it into a low-frequency motion sensor. They were ready, but readiness, Amara knew didn't make her any less a target, especially not pregnant, especially not black. From her position, crouched behind the kitchen island, she adjusted the loop of nylon around her hand. No guns for her tonight, not with a child nestled inside her ribs, her blood rushing like drum fire. But that didn't mean she was helpless. Miguel silently mouthed something from the living room. 3 front, 1 back. Then the silence shattered. A crowbar smashed through the front latch. The door burst open, splintering off its hinges. Shadows poured in. 3 men, clad in black, balaclava-covered tactical boots, absorbing every footstep. One carried a taser. One held a shotgun. The last, taller, broader, wore no insignia, but his gait and bearing betrayed him. Caldwell, the one from the sidewalk, from the bedroom, from her nightmares. But this time, Amara wasn't alone. From upstairs, a flash of movement. Ethan launched downward with brutal precision. He didn't yell. He didn't warn. He struck the first intruder in the neck with the butt of his rifle, sending him crumpling to the floor. Before the second could react, Miguel was already there, firing a beanbag round that knocked the shotgun free and shattered the man's wrist. Then came Caldwell. He moved differently now, more feral. No pretense, no badge, just raw violence. "Where's your baby girl?" he sneered, his voice sharp like broken teeth. "Still kicking in there, or do I have to?" He didn't finish the sentence. Amara was already in motion. Her body turned sideways, narrow, deliberate, protecting her precious bump while keeping her shoulders open. She charged low, sweeping a kitchen stool across the floor as a distraction, then slammed her elbow upward into Caldwell's jaw. It connected hard. He staggered but didn't fall. He smiled, a smear of blood at his lips. "You've been practicing," he grunted. Amira pivoted and kicked the back of his knee, a precise, SEAL-taught maneuver, and the brute dropped a few inches, cursing. That gave her just enough time to grab the heavy cast-iron frying pan, her grandmother's that she'd bolted behind the cabinet days ago. She swung it wide across his temple. Thwack! This time Caldwell fell. But the battle wasn't over. The fourth intruder came crashing through the back window, glass crunching beneath his boots. Miguel spun to intercept, but the man threw a flash grenade across the living room floor. The bang hit like thunder. Amira dropped to the ground, shielding her belly with her forearms, as blinding white light filled her eyes. Her ears rang. The walls rippled. "Ethan," she gasped, crawling blindly. She felt hands grip her ankle tight, rough, then drag her. She kicked backward, her heel striking bone. The grip loosened. She turned and lashed out again, this time with a knife she'd tucked into the waistband of her leggings. It caught the man in the thigh. He yelped, staggered and dropped. She didn't pause. Amira crawled behind the overturned couch, bracing for more. Her mind cycled through one thought: protect the child, protect the child, protect the child. When her vision finally returned, she saw Ethan, shirt torn, nose bleeding, pinning one attacker under a bookshelf. Miguel had cuffed another with zip ties, pressing his boot to the man's back. And Caldwell? He was trying to crawl. Blood streaked down his face, one eye swollen shut, but his mouth still worked. "You think this is over?" he rasped, spit flying. "You think you can stop what's coming?" Ethan walked over and drove the barrel of his rifle into Caldwell's shoulder. "You've already lost," Ethan said. Caldwell only grinned, a chilling sight. "You still don't get it. I am the law here." Then he passed out. For a few moments, only the sound of breathing filled the room, heavy, fractured, human. Amira slumped against the cabinet, her heart pounding, sweat soaking through her shirt. She looked down at her belly, her trembling hand caressing the curve. "Still with me, little one?" she whispered. A soft kick replied from within. Miguel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. "That's twice now. We had him, and again he's still breathing." Ethan checked the front door, weapon raised. "We call this in?" "No," Amira said sharply. "We do not trust the system." Miguel nodded grimly. "Then we do it the old way." Amira looked at Caldwell's unconscious body, then beyond it, at the photo Miguel had shown her. The tattoo, the files, the system wasn't just broken. It had teeth and it fed on silence. She stood slowly, gripping the counter for balance. "We find where they're feeding it from," she declared, "and we tear it out by the root." Caldwell, bruised and bloodied, was handed over to the sheriff's office by morning, a rare moment of justice fleeting as breath. But when Amara checked the news at 8:00 a.m., her blood ran cold. Caldwell stood outside the courthouse, smirking at reporters. No cuffs in sight, Cleared of all charges, again. The courthouse steps glistened with morning dew, but there was no cleansing in sight. Reporters circled like crows, their questions tossed like stale breadcrumbs. Sergeant Caldwell, do you deny involvement in the alleged break-in? Was there any altercation with a pregnant woman? Are you aware of the surveillance footage being deleted? Caldwell merely grinned, a man not just untouched but protected. His suit jacket bore no trace of the violence hours prior. His knuckles were wrapped in fresh gauze, but his ego was perfectly intact. He wasn't alone. Amira from across the street inside a parked, dusty sedan adjusted the angle of her side mirror. Her eyes tracked the man beside Caldwell. Tall, polished, his southern drawl buried beneath a politician's practiced smile. Senator Harris, a name Amira knew from headlines, charity boards and Sunday press releases. He was the one who funded the Safe Mothers Act 2 years ago, she murmured, her voice edged with disbelief. The same guy who toured clinics in Mississippi, claiming to protect Black maternal health. Ethan added from behind the wheel, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. And now he's playing bodyguard to a man who tried to kill you. Miguel sat in the back, scanning the courthouse entrance with a long-range camera. Watch their mouths, he muttered, zooming in. Sometimes the truth leaks from arrogance. In the distance, Harrison chuckled, leaning toward Caldwell. Their lips moved fast, confidently. Then one chilling phrase broke clean through the windshield of sound. Test batches rolling next week. We just need less attention this time. Amira froze. She replayed it in her mind, syllable by syllable. Test batch. In any other context, it might have passed unnoticed, but not now. Not after the ledgers. Not after the death certificates disguised as mercy. Not after Dr. Hamilton's warning and sudden fatal accident. The baby inside her kicked. A tiny, furious exclamation point. They're not just covering up deaths, Amira whispered, her voice filled with dawning horror. They're engineering them. Miguel nodded grimly. And Harrison? He's not just some Mai who turns silent. He's bankrolled by the same pharmaceutical firm Dr. Hamilton flagged last month. Apex Thera. Ethan's eyes darkened. The company that provided the prenatal supplements to the detention centers, the same ones all those dead women were supposedly taking. And Harrison's name is all over their shareholder statements. Miguel confirmed. It's public if you know where to look. The irony stung like salt. Harrison, the very man who had built his career smiling beside Black women, promising safety, standing at pulpits with Bibles and bullet points, was now whispering logistics with a known predator. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theater, a meticulously orchestrated deception, staged for an audience of voters too tired, too burdened, or too trusting to look deeper. Amira leaned back into the passenger seat, her heart pounding, her mind racing. They're moving something, she said. Maybe a new round of tests. A new group of women, could be undocumented, Ethan speculated. Or inmates. No oversight, no paperwork trail, which makes it urgent. Miguel added, we need to follow the money, the trucks, the labs. Whatever this test batch is, it's moving soon and fast. Outside the courthouse, the crowd began to disperse. Caldwell and Harrison exchanged a final handshake, calculated, clean, performative, before walking in opposite directions. But Amira's focus remained locked on the senator. She could still hear his voice from old press clips. Every woman, regardless of race or income, deserves dignity in childbirth. Now his voice echoed through a different filter, one where dignity meant silence, and deserves meant expendable. She broke the silence inside the car. We follow Harrison, not just because he's tied to Apex Thera, but because someone like him doesn't bury his secrets in files. He buries them in logistics, in funding routes, in signed waivers disguised as public health initiatives. Ethan nodded. So we go where the money leads. Miguel checked his watch. And fast. I'd bet every dirty badge in this town that whatever they're doing next, it starts tonight. Amira opened the glove compartment and pulled out a burner phone, wrapped in aluminum foil. She turned it on for the first time since the ambush. Her thumb hovered above the screen. One message blinked back from an encrypted contact. Plant transfer confirmed. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals. 9:30 p.m. East River Lab. They had a destination. The tires screeched as the sedan peeled out of the courthouse lot. Their next stop, Blackwell Pharmaceuticals' East River facility, where science, silence, and sin had become indistinguishable. The tires hissed against the rain-slicked asphalt as they pulled up to the towering facade of Blackwell Pharmaceuticals. Gilded glass reflected the city's skyline, sterile and pristine, an illusion of progress built on a foundation of silence. The sign out front boldly declared innovation for every life. But Amara knew better. Some lives were only useful if they could be bought, tested, and callously discarded. Inside the vehicle, the plan played out once more. Ethan scanned blueprints of the HVAC layout. Miguel monitored employee shifts on a burner laptop. And Amara suited up, not in combat gear but a disguise far more dangerous, the badge and ID of a junior compliance officer, recently furloughed after a whistleblower complaint that had mysteriously vanished. Her reflection in the visor mirror looked hollowed by rage and grim necessity. They trade in blood, she whispered to herself, her voice a promise. And they cash in silence. At precisely 9:46 p.m., Amara walked through the side employee entrance, clipboard in hand, a lanyard clipped to her blouse, exuding the bored confidence only corporate drones could replicate. The security guard barely glanced at her, too engrossed in scrolling his phone and chewing gum, to question another black woman in scrubs. The front desk was empty. Elevators required biometric scans, but the stairwell door clicked open with a bypass card Ethan had cloned 2 nights earlier. Every floor hummed with a sterile, fluorescent quiet. Hallways stretched like indifferent veins. On the 5th floor, where Apex Thera's subsidiary records were kept, the air chilled deeper than the thermostat allowed. She bypassed an empty receptionist station, slid past the glass-walled conference room, and turned into a side office marked R&D Logistics. Internal only. A keypad blinked red. She keyed in the override. Green. The lock disengaged. Inside was a dimly lit file room, metal cabinets, digital safes, and a single outdated desktop humming with a sleep mode flicker. A Blackwell logo faded across the monitor like a shadow floating on silence. She slid into the chair and inserted a flash key. Ethan's encryption breaker went to work. Click. 1 folder appeared, then 20, then hundreds. She searched by phrase: test batch, maternal trials, carceral agreement. What emerged next stole the breath from her lungs. A contract, over 30 pages long. Partnership agreement between Blackwell Pharmaceuticals and Ridgepoint Correctional Facility. Subheader: experimental protocol for controlled prenatal drug trials. Group B. Demographic. Her eyes locked on the cruel words in bold. Subjects must be women between 18 to 35 years old, pregnant at time of entry, with minimal external support structures, no attorney, family, or prior claims on file. Another section read, children further non-consensual override permissible under federal exemption. Title 42C participants categorized as state-held wards with diminished autonomy. She scrolled past dosing logs, names, ID numbers, trimester tracking, and death reports coded as maternal distress events. Every line dressed up in medical euphemism, but nothing could disguise the horrific truth. They weren't just experimenting, they were using black wombs as testing ground. Not metaphorically, literally. A breakdown of cost savings revealed the chilling motive. Projected reduction in R&D costs 72.8% by using incarcerated test population. Racial demographic optimized for statistical control. She staggered back from the monitor, bile climbing her throat. The baby kicked again, a small, startled flutter. They had turned poverty into protocol, turned systemic racism into spreadsheet efficiency. And most horrifying of all, they did it with clinical indifference. No fingerprints, just clean margins. A noise snapped her out of the spiral. Footsteps 2 doors down. Security patrol. Amara unplugged the flash key, wiped the keyboard clean, and exited the system with cold, practiced precision. She slid behind a tall file cabinet just as the hall door creaked open. 2 guards passed by, chatting lazily about fantasy football and gas prices. She waited, counted backward from 30, then slipped out down a different hall, toward a locked records closet marked Restricted Legal Archive. The keycard didn't work here. She pulled a bent paper clip from her waistband and applied Ethan's taught lockpicking technique. 1 click. 2. A grind. Then silence broke open. Inside, she found only 1 drawer labeled Offsite Legal Correspondence. Her fingers ran through manila envelopes, until one name surfaced, W. Harrison, and beside it, an authorizing signature, a name that shocked Amara to her core. As she exited through the rear stairwell, her phone buzzed once. A message from Ethan. Time's up. Meet at the river gate. You're not alone in there. Amara looked back once more at the sterile corridors. She had entered thinking she'd find corruption, but what she found was worse. Profit carved from pain. She stepped out into the night air, the documents still warm from her hands, and whispered, she sold us, she sold all of us. The car door slammed shut as Ethan sped away from the parking lot. Inside the folder, Amara held, The face of the signer came into full, devastating view. Dr. Celeste Vance, someone she had once deeply trusted. The car's wheels barely whispered on the polished asphalt of North Belhaven, an affluent neighborhood manicured to perfection, where tragedy never came uninvited, and justice wore designer shoes. The security gate opened before Ethan even touched the buzzer. That was the first sign. The second was the valet waiting out front. Not with keys but with a clipboard, asking for names under the guise of guest tracking. Inside, the Vance estate shimmered like a museum built to forget where it came from. White columns framed the entryway. Mahogany floors glistened. Abstract art dotted every wall. And overhead a chandelier so gaudy it felt like a cruel joke. But no one was laughing. Dr. Celeste Vance emerged from the second floor like a ghost with impeccable credentials. Her silk blouse uncreased, her heels silent on the stair. A woman once hailed as the face of civil rights in medicine. A woman who decades ago had marched arm in arm with mothers of the incarcerated. A woman whose TED Talk on equity in healthcare had gone viral before streaming algorithms started burying content like that. Now she was CEO of Blackwell Pharmaceuticals, and her signature was on the horrific contract Amira had just discovered. She offered no handshake. "I expected you yesterday," Celeste said evenly, her voice rich but cold. "The moment you saw the seal on that file, I knew you'd come." Ethan stepped forward, his body angled just enough to shield Amira. "We're not here for negotiation." Celeste lifted an eyebrow. "That's a shame, because I no longer offer apology." Amira spoke for the first time, her tone low and trembling, not from fear, but from a profound rage reined in by years of learning how to survive rooms like this. "You sold us out," Celeste let the words hang in the air. "You think I don't know what they did to those women?" Amira continued, stepping closer, her voice sharper. "The test batches, the override clauses, the death reports rewritten like footnotes. You signed that paper, Celeste." Celeste walked past them toward a crystal decanter and poured herself a drink. "Nothing fancy, just scotch, neat, human." "I didn't sign paper," she said at last. "I signed survival." The room went still. "You think the only battlefield is Ridgepoint Prison?" "No, dear. The real fight is here, in rooms like this, where policy gets written, where funding gets funneled, where silence is currency, and noise gets buried." "But those women died," Amira snapped. "You knew," Celeste turned sharply. "Of course I knew. I read every report. I tracked the first 7 pregnancies myself before they took it from my hands. And you know what I learned? That screaming gets you one of 2 things. Either a podium, or a coffin. And I wasn't ready to die. Not then." Ethan spoke for the first time. "But you were ready to let others die." Celeste didn't flinch. "I was ready to control the fire instead of burning with it." She walked to a hidden console beneath the bookshelf and tapped a button. A screen lowered, footage rolled. Amira on the sidewalk, Caldwell lunging, her spinning kick landing squarely on his jaw. But the angle wasn't from a neighbor's camera. It was from the traffic camera across the street, one that had supposedly glitched the moment everything went down. "You shut the camera off," Amira whispered, a chill running down her spine. Celeste nodded slowly, and turned it back on right after. "You were pregnant, Black, alone, and you fought back. That's 3 strikes. You'd be dead now or disappeared if I hadn't intervened. That kick of yours made you a liability to both sides. But it also made you visible, and visibility forces a choice." "Is that what this is?" Amira's voice cracked. "You're trying to buy silence with favors?" "No, I'm giving you a warning," Celeste said, stepping closer. Her expensive perfume mingled with the scent of regret and a twisted self-absolution. "If you expose what you found, those contracts, those deaths, my name, the community you claim to protect will implode. Trust will shatter. The police will double down. The state will bury everything under legal warfare. And you?" She paused, her gaze chilling. "You'll lose that child before justice ever sees daylight." Amira backed away, disgust coiling in her throat. "You sound like them." "No," Celeste replied quietly. "I sound like a woman who survived them." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Amira glanced around the opulent room, framed awards, degrees from Yale and Howard, photos of Celeste at podiums with senators and activists, all monuments to a legacy now soaked in betrayal. "You were supposed to be one of us," Amira said softly, tears threatening to fall. "You were hope." "I was," Celeste whispered. "Then I learned that hope doesn't pay for hospital wings." Amira turned to leave, her hand on the doorknob, but Celeste added one final crushing blow. "If you don't walk away now, they will come for you, Amira. And this time I won't stop them." Celeste's words hung in the air like smoke from a hidden fire. "If you don't stay silent, your people won't rise. They'll bleed." In the car, Ethan remained silent. He didn't have to speak. The storm raging inside Amara was louder than any siren. She stared out the window, clutching her abdomen, where her child kicked gently, blissfully unaware that his mother now held a truth that could ignite a war. The car hadn't moved in 20 minutes, sitting quietly under the sweeping branches of an old southern oak, the kind that had watched generations rise and fall, some with dignity, most with chains. The mansion behind them loomed in the rearview mirror like a mausoleum for what Celeste Vance once stood for. Inside the car, Amara sat motionless, her hands pressed against her thighs to keep them from shaking. Ethan said nothing at first. He'd learned that silence could be both a sanctuary and a trap. Tonight, it was both. The dashboard clock blinked 11:48 p.m., but the air felt timeless, stretched by betrayal and moral exhaustion. Neither had touched the cold coffee in their cup holders. Finally, Amara broke the silence. She wasn't supposed to be one of them. Her voice was brittle. Not her. Ethan turned slightly, studying her profile in the glow of a street lamp that flickered like a bad conscience. You grew up watching her on public access, protests, panels, scholarships named after her. She delivered the eulogy at my cousin's funeral, Amara added, her eyes hollow, back when we thought police reform could be real. The silence returned, heavier this time, stained with the stench of compromise. Amara pulled a pen from her coat pocket, a sleek recording device, hidden in its elegant shell. She clicked it twice, scrolled through its digital memory, then hit play. Celeste's calm voice filled the confined cabin. I tracked the first 7 pregnancies myself and I wasn't ready to die. Not then. Then came the fatal line, softly spoken. If you expose what you found, the community will implode. The clip ended, static lingered. Ethan exhaled. It's not enough. Intentions aren't admissible. Amara replied flatly. She never directly admitted the trials. No names, no procedural link to the prison or Blackwell's R&D wing, and unless a judge has been hiding a soul, we're not getting a warrant out of that. Amara slumped back in her seat, closing her eyes. Her hand reflexively cradled her stomach, where a gentle flutter reminded her why silence could never be the answer. She wasn't just fighting for ghosts, she was fighting for someone who hadn't yet taken their first breath. Ethan, she whispered, if we take her down, what happens to the movement? He didn't rush his answer. The movement isn't Celeste Vance. She built the hospital in West Dallas, funded prenatal outreach, got those body cam laws passed in 3 states. If the public finds out, then maybe they'll finally stop worshiping heroes and start demanding accountability. He cut in, not harshly, just honestly. She made her choice. Amara, now you have to make yours. Amara opened her eyes, her gaze no longer soft. We need someone from inside Blackwell, someone who didn't sell their soul for a title. Ethan reached into the glove box, pulled out a manila folder and dropped it on her lap. That's everyone who's worked in compliance, R&D, or legal over the past 5 years. Triple-checked against Hamilton's hospital logs and the state death index. She thumbed through the names. Most were irrelevant, but one jumped out. Janelle Porter, VP of Compliance. It wasn't just the title, it was the jagged red underline done in pen, not highlighter, and the chilling note in the margin. Ask about 0319 meeting. She knows. Dr. Lena Hamilton had written that. Amara held up the card clipped to the page. A simple church business card. First Ebenezer Choir, Sunday 10 a.m., with Janelle Porter listed as soprano, lead section. They always find the ones with a conscience, Amara murmured. Ethan tilted his head. That address is in South Ridgemont. She hasn't moved to a gated community. That's something. We go in soft, Ethan said. Public space, no mention of the file, the contract or Celeste. Let her talk first. Amara nodded but didn't speak, her eyes fixed on Janelle's name. One more potential witness in a long list of silenced or slain. But something about this one felt different. She sings in a choir, she whispered. People who sing like that, they don't usually survive in places like Blackwell. Ethan leaned back and finally sipped the coffee. It was awful. She's survived so far. That means she's been walking the line. Amara nodded. Then we better meet her before she decides which side of it to fall on. They started the car and pulled away from the Vance estate. Behind them, the mansion's motion sensor lights flickered again, though no one had moved. The house sat in perfect stillness, like a monument to every line that had ever been crossed under the illusion of progress. The drive back was quiet, but not empty. Amara's mind churned with questions. What did Janelle know? Why had she stayed silent? Could someone so deep inside a company profiting off Black Death suddenly choose justice, without being coerced? As they neared their safe house, Amara checked her phone one last time before setting it to airplane mode. A text had arrived from an unlisted number. Just 4 words. Don't trust the choir. She showed it to Ethan, his jaw clenched. They're already watching her. They're watching everyone, Amara said. And they want us scared. But as she looked down at Janelle's underlined name again, the fear curdled into something else. Absolute resolve. Amira held Janelle's choir card between her fingers, the church's address scribbled in faded ink, and whispered to herself, "No one sings that close to the fire unless they've already been burned." The next morning, as gospel music drifted from the old wooden doors of First Ebenezer Baptist Church, Amara and Ethan slipped into the back pew, searching not just for a voice, but for a truth that could still be saved. The wooden doors of First Ebenezer Baptist Church creaked shut behind Amara and Ethan, muffling the fading echoes of Sunday morning gospel. Outside, sunlight danced off the stained glass like fractured promises. But inside, the old sanctuary still carried the lingering warmth of voices that had for one brief hour tried to touch heaven. Amara walked softly down the side aisle, careful not to interrupt the hush that followed benediction. Ethan trailed close, his eyes scanning for exits and shadows, the instincts of a man who knew too much about how places of peace could become targets of retaliation. They found her in the choir room. Janelle Porter stood at the far end, carefully folding a purple robe embroidered with gold thread. Her movements were precise, almost reverent. She didn't flinch at their approach, just turned slowly, her face composed yet tired, a weariness that went deeper than lack of sleep. "I know who you are," she said quietly, without preamble. "You've already put a target on my back just by walking in here." Amara nodded but didn't apologize. "You work in compliance at Blackwell," she said, "and Dr. Hamilton trusted you." Janelle's hands stilled on the fabric. The mention of Lena Hamilton landed like a stone. "She's gone," Janelle whispered. "I heard about the accident." A bitter smile flickered across her lips. "They do tidy work when they want to." Amara stepped closer, pulling a slim envelope from her coat. Inside was a single copy of the death ledger Hamilton had compiled, names of Black women, all pregnant, all dead behind bars, each one labeled natural causes on the public record. The ink had faded in some places, but the raw grief it carried hadn't dulled. Amara laid it gently on the piano beside Janelle. "She died trying to expose this," Amara said. "You don't have to, but I need you to tell me whether any of it is true." Janelle didn't reach for the envelope. She stared at it as though it might explode. "My husband is a mortician," she finally said, her voice steadier now, but her eyes betrayed the war raging inside her. "He prepped 6 of those women before they were buried. 3 had bruises, restraints. 1 had a broken jaw that never showed up on the intake form." Amara's jaw tight, Ethan's fists clenched in his coat pockets. "I flagged one of the anomalies 6 months ago," Janelle continued, her voice growing thin. "Sent a quiet request for internal review. 2 days later, my badge stopped working at the West Wing terminals. My logins were reset. I got the mess." "Why didn't you leave?" Ethan asked, not with judgment, but a kind of weary compassion. Janelle turned, facing the stained glass cross on the far wall. "Because I'm not stupid," she said, her voice laced with a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. "I grew up watching people get torn apart just for asking questions. I worked too hard, survived too much to be called a traitor to my own people." Then she faced Amara again, her eyes sharp. "Now you think you're fighting them, but what you're really up against, it's not just greed, it's fear, it's loyalty, it's survival. The hardest part of this fight is knowing your own community will hate you more than the men who made the system." Amara didn't answer immediately. She let the words settle. Then she offered the only truth she had left. "I don't care what they call me," she said softly. "I just want this child to be born in a world where Black women don't have to die in silence for someone else's profit." For the first time, Janelle's facade cracked. Her shoulders slumped. She reached for the folder, held it like something sacred, then slowly sat on the edge of the piano bench, her eyes wet but unblinking. "I'll help," she whispered, "but only under federal protection. No leaks, no press, no local PD. I'm not dying a martyr for people who won't remember my name." Amara nodded. "We can get you that, but we'll need more than your word. Documents, chains of custody, something they can't spin." Janelle hesitated, then leaned forward. "They don't store everything on site. Not anymore. Too many whistleblowers in the 90s taught them better. There's a secondary vault, off-grid external storage. They call it Vault Delta." Ethan stepped in. "Location?" She shook her head. "Only high-clearance staff have access. Vance signs off on all retrievals, but I know where the server backups ping every 7. If you can intercept the packet, you'll get metadata, enough to justify a federal order." Amara exchanged a glance with Ethan. This was the crack they needed. "Why are you really doing this?" Amara asked quietly. Janelle didn't look up. She just smoothed the choir robe in her lap, her eyes distant. "My sister died during childbirth at Central Women's. They said it was an embolism, but I saw the pictures. Her wrists were bruised. They used restraints. The robe trembled in her hands. She was not. Her baby died with her. A heavy silence. Janelle finally stood, handed the folder back to Amira, then reached into her coat and passed over a business card with a private email scribbled on the back. Get me a Title III warrant and a sealed subpoena. I'll send you everything I have. Amira tucked the card into her coat, her eyes never leaving Janelle's. I promise no one will know it came from you. As they turned to leave, Janelle's voice stopped them at the door. Vault Delta, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper beneath the choir's lingering echo. That's where the bodies are. If not in flesh, then in data. You find that server, you'll burn their whole empire down. Amira didn't look back, but she heard Janelle's last words. Don't knock on the front door. They built a tunnel to keep secrets buried. That night, in a low-lit motel outside city limits, Amira drafted a secure message to Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Whitaker. They needed Title III clearance and a federal hammer strong enough to crack open a vault that had been sealed with blood. Monday morning arrived cloaked in the kind of stillness that always preceded storms. Gray clouds loomed low over the federal courthouse, as if the sky itself had decided to bear witness. Inside, bureaucracy moved, not with urgency, but with solemn calculation, the slow machinery of justice, grinding toward truth only when pushed by enough pressure and pain. Amira sat quietly in the waiting area outside the USA. Dana Whitaker's office. The seal of the United States Department of Justice hung like an accusation above the frosted glass door, its golden eagle polished but indifferent. Across from her, Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, scanning every passerby with the gaze of a man who trusted no one, not even the system that once trained him. The door opened, and Dana stepped out, trim and composed in a slate gray suit, her eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. She wasn't a woman easily rattled, but today, even she looked as if she'd been handed something radioactive. You'd better come in, she said simply. Inside, a spread of documents lay across her desk. Printed transcripts of Amira's pen-recorded conversation with Celeste Vance, the partial ledger of inmate deaths from Dr. Hamilton, and a sworn statement, unsigned but initialed, prepared by Janelle Porter. Each piece alone might raise eyebrows. Together they formed something heavier. Not yet a case, but a spark. Dana sat down and folded her hands. You understand what you're asking for isn't just a search warrant, she began, her tone clipped but clear. You're asking for a narrowly tailored Title III authorization for electronic surveillance, data interception and conditional physical search of a privately held storage facility. We don't get that without probable cause, or a judge willing to bleed for it. Amira nodded, her voice steady. We have women dead, a whistleblower silenced, and a compliance officer on the edge. The only thing we're missing is someone with enough spine to sign the page. Dana regarded her for a long moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out the prepared motion packet. She tapped it once, crisply. The judge will meet us in chambers at noon. The federal judge assigned to the matter was Harold M. Laskin, an elder of the bench with thinning white hair and a reputation for applying the law like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He listened without interruption as Dana presented the packet. His chambers smelled of old law books and lemon oil, and the only sounds were the ticking of a grandfather clock and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He took his time reading through the affidavit. When he finally looked up, his voice was not unkind, but it was sharp enough to cut through stone. This touches pharmaceuticals, private detention contracts, and local law enforcement, all under the shadow of race and gender discrimination. You understand the political firestorm you're inviting? Dana didn't blink. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Laskin sighed, leaned back and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Fine. I'll authorize a conditional Title III order, limited to Vault Delta server pingbacks and physical evidence recovery, pending chain of custody verification. No press, no leaks, and I want 2 federal agents overseeing the execution. He reached for his pen, and Miss Cole, he added, his gaze falling on Amira. If you're lying or misleading this court in any way, your child won't be the only one paying for your mistakes. Amira met his eyes without flinching. I've already buried too much truth, Your Honor. I'm not doing it again. With a slow, deliberate stroke, the judge signed his name. The paper was just a formality. The weight behind it was made of iron. Outside the courthouse, the air had grown thicker, humid. Amira tucked the warrant packet into a secure envelope, while Dana typed instructions into her encrypted phone. They moved briskly toward the parking garage. Janelle waited in a separate vehicle, as agreed, her anxiety barely concealed behind the tinted glass of a borrowed sedan. Ethan reached the driver's side of their SUV and paused. Something felt off. The sound came first, a low rev, distant but fast. Then, like a hunter breaking cover, a matte black pickup truck barreled into the garage from the far entrance, its engine growling like a warning. No plates, Ethan snapped, He shoved Amira toward the passenger side as the truck veered hard in their direction. Tires screeched. The truck fishtailed slightly on the oil-slick concrete. Dana barely had time to duck behind a pillar before the vehicle surged past, missing them by inches. Then came the sickening sound of impact, a solid crunch as the truck slammed into a concrete divider. The driver reversed wildly, but something fell from the undercarriage, a small black rectangle, spinning as it skidded across the floor. It came to rest at Ethan's feet. He bent down and picked it up. The front plate had been removed, but this was the registration tag, wedged into the metal framework of the vehicle's front bumper. Faded but legible, it bore an insignia Amira recognized instantly. The emblem of the Volunteer Law Enforcement Auxiliary Unit of Jackson Parish, a group known for supplementing local police when budgets were tight, and for having loose rules about who qualified. Dana emerged slowly from behind the column, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with something between fury and disbelief. "They're panicking," she said. "They should," Ethan replied, his eyes hardening. Amira turned the tag over in her hand. "Volunteers," she muttered. "That's what they call themselves when no badge wants the blame." Dana dusted off her coat, her voice like steel cutting through the tension. "We have the warrant now." Her eyes narrowed toward the garage exit. "It's time to open the vault." That night, under cover of darkness, 3 unmarked vehicles slipped past the edge of the industrial district, headlights off. Their destination loomed ahead like a secret buried in steel and concrete. Vault Delta. What lay inside had been hidden for years, and by morning, it might burn. Rain drizzled in cold needles across the cracked asphalt of the abandoned industrial zone, cloaking the night in a metallic hush. Vault Delta crouched like a forgotten bunker. Brutalist concrete, rusted gutters, a single roll-up gate, the kind of place built to be ignored. At the ramp, Amara's breath feathered the damp air, one hand cupping her belly beneath her jacket. To a passerby, she might have seemed to be adjusting her coat. Ethan knew better. Scanning the shadows, tension braided into his stance. Janelle Porter led them, her Blackwell badge clipped discreetly to her coat, fear glinting in her eyes despite her resolve. "They rotate security every 36 hours, she whispered. "Brooks is on tonight. Surveillance pit. If we're lucky, he's bored." "If we're lucky," Ethan muttered, "he's already gone." Janelle swiped her card. A soft click. No siren, no buzz, just a steel lock sliding back, almost too easily. They slipped through a side door, the rubber seal exhaling a hiss. Inside, fluorescence buzzed above sterile corridors. The air smelled of dust, ozone, something faintly chemical. Server racks hummed along one wall. Behind glass, cabinets of drives stood in cold, clinical rows. Sleek, inhuman. Janelle moved to the central terminal. "The true archive isn't here," she said. "It mirrors off-site, but this cache logs every access, login, trigger, and active test file. If anyone authorized trials, it's in here." Amira and Ethan flanked her like shadows. Then a sound wired straight into Amara's nerves. The dry click of a safety being flicked off. "You shouldn't have come." Lieutenant Thomas Brooks stepped from the far hallway with 2 men in matte black at his shoulders, mercenary muscle hired for silence. His grin was crooked, his eyes bright with the cruel assurance of a true believer. "I figured someone would poke the hive," he said, his pistol already leveled at Amira. "Didn't think the pregnant one would lead the parade." Ethan reached for his weapon. One guard moved first, his baton whistling through the air. Ethan caught the blow on his forearm, pain-wringing bone, and the room detonated into motion. The second guard lunged at Amira, his angle aimed directly at her midsection. She pivoted tight, trapped his wrist, and used his momentum to throw him hard to the concrete. He scrambled. She kneed his shoulder, locking him limp. At the terminal, Janelle's hands shook but flew. Overvoids. A chime. The cabinet's heart clicked open to neat rows of labeled drives. Barcodes, initials, chilling notes. Batch 14B. Inmate trial live dosing. "Game's over," Brooks growled, his sights settling on Amira. The gunshot cracked through the room. Amira staggered. No pain. Warmth spattered her chest. Not hurt. Miguel Santiago filled the rear doorway, his face pale, jaw set. He had slipped in through the service corridor, weapon drawn, but a breath too late. He had stepped between Brooks and Amira and taken the bullet. He sank to his knees, his hand clamped over the dark bloom across his shirt. "Run," he rasped, his voice fading. Amira dropped beside him, catching his weight. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I should have." He offered the thinnest smile. "Finish it. My wife would be proud." Brooks advanced to end it. Ethan drove into him like a battering ram, slamming him to the wall, a knee to the gut, a shoulder to the jaw, the pistol skittering away. In seconds, Ethan had Brooks face down, his wrists crushed into zip ties. Janelle stood frozen, the unlocked drive trembling in her grip. Amira pressed Miguel's hand, felt the strength draining, his breath turning ragged, uneven. His fingers slackened. The air went still. She didn't scream. She rose, laid him gently to the floor, took the drive from Janelle, and turned toward the exit, Miguel's blood soaking her jacket like war paint. Sirens braided toward them, U.S. Marshals lights refracting off the rain. Dana Whitaker stepped from the lead SUV in a vest, her eyes widening at the scene, and then hardening with purpose. Amira walked straight to her, placed the drive in her palm. "I'll seal it now," Dana said, already signaling evidence technicians, "and draft charges for everyone this cash touches." Amira didn't blink. "I will finish this." Marshals hauled Brooks to a transport van, sealed the building, logged every entry, every handoff. In the mobile command unit, the drive spun up, its tiny light pulsing. Outside, rain hissed along the concrete. Inside, the fans rose to a steady whir. After years of silence, Vault Delta began to speak, and every secret it carried prepared to scream. Evidence technicians photographed the cabinet, printed barcodes, and sealed each tray in anti-static sleeves under Dana's supervision, time-stamped and countersigned. Janelle recited her access permissions, her voice steadying as procedure wrapped terror in order. Ethan mapped corridor cameras for subpoenas. Amira stood in the doorway a beat longer, memorizing the room where a network chose profit over breath, then followed the chain of custody log outside, rainwashing Miguel's blood into a thin red seam along the ramp. The evidence room inside the AUSA's office was colder than Amira expected, not just in temperature but in tone. Everything about it was sterile, clinical, and devoid of the chaos and grief that had marked the past few days. Miguel's blood was still fresh in her memory, though her clothes had long since been changed. The silence around her now, broken only by the hum of overhead fluorescence and the occasional clicking of a lock being checked twice, made her feel like she was walking through the calm before a second, more bureaucratic storm. Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Whitaker stood near the intake counter, arms crossed, reviewing the transfer ledger with sharp eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was clipped, quiet, and deeply aware of the immense weight they were now holding. "We've secured the physical hard drive under a dual chain of custody protocol," Dana said, not looking up from the logbook. "But that won't stop them. Brooks may be in federal holding, but Caldwell is still moving freely. His people will go after this from another angle. Total sabotage." Amira stepped closer, her arms folded protectively across her chest. Meaning, Dana said, finally meeting her gaze. "They'll question every step we took, whether Janelle had proper clearance, whether we had sufficient probable cause, whether this drive was tampered with in transport. They'll try to suppress everything on technical grounds before it ever reaches trial." Ethan leaned against the wall, visibly exhausted, but still alert. "So, we bury them in redundancy. Chain of custody logs. Video witness corroboration." Dana nodded. "Exactly, and we'll need more than what's on that drive. We need to tie it back to the very beginning, to the incident that set this whole thing in motion. The day Caldwell arrested Amira without cause." The words hung between them like static. Amira's eyes narrowed. "I think I know someone who can help." Later that afternoon, they pulled up outside a modest two-story house on the east side, sunlight slanting across the porch where Liam Hart sat hunched over a tool bench, tinkering with the frame of a rusted bicycle. The very same Liam who had stood silently as Caldwell twisted the narrative during that first horrific confrontation. The same young man who had looked at the ground while a black woman was dragged away in cuffs for daring to speak. He looked up, startled as Amira approached, then immediately lowered his gaze again, as if shame still clung to him like sweat. "I figured this day might come," he muttered. "Didn't think you'd be the one to knock." Amira didn't blink. "You saw what happened that morning. You heard Caldwell call me a liar and say I was trespassing when I wasn't. You watched him rough me up in front of half the block. You knew it was wrong." "I did," Liam admitted, his voice barely audible. "But I also knew what he was capable of. I'd seen it before, just not on someone pregnant. He threatened to charge me with obstruction if I contradicted him." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low. "Liam, we don't need you to relive it. We need you to correct it. On record." Liam's hands trembled as he wiped grease from his palms. "I don't want to be a part of this because I'm scared. I want to be a part of it because it's the right damn thing to do." Amira nodded. "Then let's do it right." Back at Dana's office, they recorded Liam's sworn affidavit. He gave a full, raw account. How Caldwell arrived on Amira's property without a warrant, how she was arrested without cause, how he was pressured into silence, and how guilt had eaten at him every day since. The testimony was raw, imperfect, human, and it was undeniably real. Still, Dana wanted more. "That gets us probable cause," she said. But if Caldwell's team moves to dismiss on the claim that no footage exists, I might have something better than probable cause, came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Ruth Miles stood there, a folded piece of paper and a USB flash drive in her hand. The woman who had once chastised Amira for making waves now looked like someone carrying the heavy burden of seeing too much and staying silent for too long. I was cleaning out my late husband's cloud storage a few weeks ago, Ruth said, stepping into the room. He always had auto-sync on his devices, paranoid about losing data. That morning, he had just installed a new camera system facing our driveway. Amira's breath caught. Ruth unfolded the paper, revealing a time-stamped still image of Caldwell's patrol cruiser, parked outside her property, the angle wide enough to capture Amira's porch. I wasn't brave then, Ruth said, her voice filled with quiet regret. But this clip, it's untouched. No edits. Caldwell had no idea it existed. Dana took the drive and slid it into her encrypted laptop. A few keystrokes later, the video began to play. There it was, the unvarnished truth. Caldwell storming onto Amira's porch, ignoring her protests, shoving her before she could even ask for a warrant. And the worst part? The cold, calculated expression on his face as he reached for his cuffs. Dana's jaw clenched. This, she said, pausing the footage, is the missing piece. Video corroboration of unlawful seizure, physical aggression, and badge misuse. Combined with the Vault Delta documents, we now have grounds to charge under 18 U.S. Code Section 24-2, deprivation of rights under color of law. Ethan exhaled, a long, weary breath. What's next? Dana turned to Amira. We go for the jugular today. Dana slid a file across the table toward the marshal's detail. Her voice was even, but it carried the immense weight of everything they had just assembled. This is the key that unlocks the entire case. Every chain of corruption, every lie hidden behind a badge, and now, we have the irrefutable proof. Within the hour, an emergency arrest warrant was issued for Lieutenant Thomas Brooks on conspiracy and unlawful experimentation. Next in the queue, the man who started it all, Roy Caldwell. His days of impunity were finally numbered. The sky above Crest Hill darkened with the late afternoon storm, thick clouds pulling low over rows of aging sedans and pickup trucks. Rain tapped a nervous rhythm against windshields and corrugated metal awnings, offering shoppers the illusion of routine. But for Janelle Porter, there was nothing routine about today. She tightened her grip on the cart as it bumped against a cracked concrete seam, her canvas bag growing heavier with every step. Her head was down, her movements brisk, but every few seconds her eyes darted to reflections in parked windows or the faint shuffle of shoes behind her. Ever since the Vault Delta breach, she had slept with a chair braced against her door, heard whispers in the hallways at work, and her husband reported someone had rifled through the glove box of their truck. And now, a call from an unknown number that simply said, "You should have kept singing." She wasn't alone, though. She'd agreed to cooperate under federal protection, and Amira and Ethan had insisted on shadowing her quietly, discreetly. Dana had warned them, when power senses it's cornered, it lashes out. And Janelle, though brave, was the spark that could ignite every dry lie in the Blackwell machine. From a sedan 3 rows over, Amira watched through binoculars, her fingers tapping against the grip of her baton, concealed beneath a messenger bag. Ethan sat in the driver's seat beside her, engine idling. "She's checking over her shoulder," Amira murmured. "That's her third glance in under a minute." Ethan leaned in. Someone shadowing her back near the red van. Guy with a rain poncho but no groceries. "Look." Amira tracked the man's movement, a slow, predatory drift. His walk was too deliberate, his eyes too fixed on Janelle's silhouette. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not random." Then Amira saw it. The glint beneath the poncho, not much, just a sheen of metal, but enough. "He's armed," she breathed, her voice tight. "We move now." Janelle was nearing her car, a beat-up Corolla tucked near the edge of the lot. When she heard the footsteps behind her accelerate, she turned, and for one frozen second, met the eyes of the man rushing her. No words, just chilling intent. She dropped her groceries and bolted between rows of vehicles. The man followed. From across the lot, Ethan floored the gas. The sedan roared to life, tires skidding across the wet asphalt. Horns blared as cars veered out of the way. Amira leapt out mid-turn, her baton already drawn, sprinting diagonally to cut off the assailant. The man raised his weapon, but hesitated too late. Janelle had ducked behind an SUV. A blur of motion came from the corner of his vision. Ethan's sedan slammed into the concrete barrier, cutting off his retreat. The impact forced him to twist, his gun wavering. That's when Amira came down hard from behind, crashing the baton across his wrist with a clean, practiced arc. The gun clattered to the ground. He spun, reaching for her, but she delivered a swift elbow to his temple, and followed with a takedown sweep that left him gasping for air, flat against the pavement. "Don't move," she warned, her knee pinning his chest as she zip-tied his wrists. Ethan pulled up, engines still running. He opened the trunk and retrieved a secured evidence bag. "That's a Sig Sauer," he said, eyeing the pistol. "Military-grade serial intact." And then came the voice from the shadows behind the row of trucks. Another figure emerged, limping slightly, dressed in a civilian jacket with a badge clipped to the inside pocket. "Lieutenant Thomas Brooks. What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is all a misunderstanding. That man has no connection to me." Ethan stepped forward, his gun drawn. "So why is he using a firearm traced back to your tactical supply room?" Brooks hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the gun on the ground. Janelle stood, trembling but unbroken. "You sent him. I knew it. You couldn't silence me inside Vault Delta, so now you're trying it out here." More sirens rose in the distance. Not the ominous wail of danger but the grounded authority of state troopers. Within moments, 2 squad cars skidded into the lot, officers disembarking with rifles drawn. Brooks began to backpedal, his hands half raised. One trooper stepped in. "Lieutenant Thomas Brooks, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit witness tampering and attempted murder. Drop your badge and place your hands behind your head." His mouth opened, stunned. "Wait, I didn't act alone. I didn't give the order." Amira's eyes narrowed. "Then who did?" Brooks didn't look at her. He looked past her, as if haunted. His lips moved slowly. "Caldwell and Chief Langley. I took the call from Langley myself." The silence that followed was heavier than the siren. Brooks, the enforcer of secrets, now trembled in the hands of the very law he had long bent to his will. The gun, now bagged and tagged, would go into evidence, proof of a conspiracy that had crossed the line from policy to bloodshed, and the names he'd just whispered would ignite the next crucial phase of the investigation. Back at Dana's office, the audio from the arrest was already being transcribed. With Brooks's confession and the attempted hit foiled, she prepared an emergency petition to the federal grand jury. What had started with a wrongful arrest had now become a full-scale federal case, and the noose was tightening around Langley and Caldwell. The fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse hallway flickered with their usual cold indifference. But inside the grand jury chamber, sealed, silent, sacred, truth pulsed like a heartbeat under immense pressure. Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Whitaker stood behind the oak podium, a stack of marked exhibits at her side. She wasn't there to make speeches. She was there to burn away the rot. Behind her, the witnesses sat, waiting their turn, one by one. Amira first, her voice steady but heavy as she described not just the attack in the alley but the chilling pattern of coercion, silence, and cover-up. Liam followed, finally brave enough to admit Caldwell had threatened to have his juvenile record reopened if he didn't fall in line. Ruth Miles brought the room to stunned stillness, with her cloud-synced footage, showing the exact moment Caldwell raised his hand against Amira, and the look of smug impunity on his face. But it was Janelle's testimony that cut deepest. She broke mid-sentence when describing the bruises on the bodies her husband had prepared for burial. Black women, pregnant, lifeless. The choir singer who once filled sanctuaries with harmonies now offered a solo of sorrow, bearing witness to how compliance had cost souls. Dana, never one to appeal emotionally, paused just once. She lifted the external drive, secured from Vault Delta, and placed it on the railing. "This is the ledger of every violation," she said. "Every medical record altered, every subject tagged, every protocol breached for profit. Names, dates, doses, and yes, deaths." She didn't call the conspiracy by one name. She called it by many: honest services fraud, criminal negligence, conspiracy under RICO, involuntary manslaughter, and finally civil rights violations under color of law. No one in that jury room asked for dramatic framing. They didn't need it. By the time Dana rested, the weight of it all was undeniable. Within 30 minutes, the first round of federal indictments was signed. 1,000 miles away from the solemn intensity of the courthouse, the mood at a private airstrip on the edge of Fairhope, Alabama, was frantic. Dr. Celeste Vance, dressed in a camel-toned designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses, strode across the tarmac with hurried grace. Her assistant trailed behind her with documents and a half-packed bag. She barely acknowledged him. The jet was already fueled, the flight plan filed to Dubai, her scheduled conference conveniently aligning with a storm of subpoenas. She had almost reached the aircraft stairs when the first voice echoed over the engine's idle hum. "Celeste Vance, U.S. Marshals." Her stilettos froze mid-step. 2 marshals approached from either side. The senior one presented a warrant. The younger one already had cuffs drawn. Celeste didn't yell. She didn't resist. She only whispered, her voice filled with a chilling self-pity. "I gave them options. They took advantage." Her arms were pulled behind her as the cuffs clicked into place. The hum of the jet, Now a bitter backdrop to her long, ignominious descent from celebrated activist to despised defendant. Elsewhere in a worn-down motel off the I-10 corridor, Roy Caldwell lay sprawled in bed, flipping through a channel guide. A six-pack sweated on the nightstand. The lamp flickered, casting the room in nauseating amber. He never heard the knock. The door burst open. 3 U.S. Marshals swarmed in, shouting commands. Caldwell reached for the nightstand, not for a weapon, but for a badge he still clung to, like it meant absolution. One marshal stomped his wrist down. "You're under arrest for civil rights violations, conspiracy and attempted witness tampering." "You know why?" Caldwell didn't respond. He just stared at the badge, now face down in a puddle of warm beer. The last arrest was the one that shook the department itself. Chief Langley sat at the head of the conference table in the Crestwood Police Department, flanked by his lieutenants. He had just begun a budget review meeting when the door opened, not with a knock, but with the flash of a federal badge. Amira stood just outside the threshold. She wasn't there as an officer, but as a silent witness to justice. Langley's smirk barely cracked. "You can't be serious." Dana entered behind the marshals. "You instructed officers to alter evidence. You authorized illegal surveillance. And according to Brooks, you used a hit on a federal witness." Langley chuckled once. "That's hearsay." Dana stepped forward. "No, it's testimony. Corroborated, recorded, admissible, and effective immediately. You are suspended, stripped of command, and under arrest." The room fell to stunned silence as the chief of police was led out in cuffs, passing by the very officers whose silence he once enforced with fear. By nightfall, the news spread like wildfire. Televisions in homes, barbershops, and diners flickered with the same breaking headline: Blackwell Pharmaceuticals under federal indictment. Stocks plummet 7. Photos of Vance, Harrison, Caldwell, and Langley rotated on screen beneath the bold scroll. Widespread conspiracy uncovered. Federal charges filed. The nation's conscience had been jolted awake. In Montgomery, Atlanta, Baton Rouge, protests sparked. In New York and D.C., rallies formed. Online hashtags surged. But it wasn't just outrage. It was vindication for the families who had buried daughters, for the communities gaslit for years, for the nurses and coroners who had whispered behind locked doors. And at the center of it, Amira stood, not as a savior, but as living proof that the system could bleed and still be forced to reckon with its own wounds. But even as the indictments made headlines and federal teams prepared their prosecution, the fight was far from over. Defense lawyers, funded by deep pockets and old alliances, were already filing motions to suppress the very evidence Amira and her team had risked their lives to secure. The next battle wouldn't be in the streets, but in the hallowed, unforgiving halls of the courtroom. It was the kind of morning where the air felt sharper than usual, the kind that cut clean across marble pillars and polished brass. Inside the federal courthouse, Courtroom 4B was already packed, rows of pew-stiff benches lined with reporters, silent observers and attorneys who spoke not in outrage, but in loopholes and precedents. The motion hearing had been scheduled quickly, as expected in a high-profile federal case, but no one present mistook speed for simplicity. At the front, presiding was Judge Evelyn Morris, a woman known for her cool temperament and an absolute intolerance for drama in her courtroom. Her silver hair was braided back tight, her gavel resting neatly beside a stack of briefs. She scanned the docket, her tone even as she began. "We are here today to hear motions filed by counsel for defendants Harrison, Vance, Langley, and Caldwell, each seeking, among other remedies, to suppress evidence obtained under warrant or through witness testimony." Across the aisle, Dana Whitaker stood in a navy suit, her posture rigid, her eyes clear. She didn't pace or preamble. She listened, took notes, and waited. The defense moved first. Celeste Vance's attorney, a towering man named Whitford Carr, rose with the casual smugness that came from arguing in front of this court for decades. "Your Honor, we contend that the seizure of data from the offsite storage facility, labeled Vault Delta, constituted a Fourth Amendment violation. The operation lacked proper procedural notice. There was no adequate confirmation that the premises were an official Blackwell repository, nor that my client had been made aware of the search prior to execution." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're arguing your client should have been notified before law enforcement executed a sealed warrant on a third-party facility, registered to a shell entity connected to her company?" Carr nodded once. "We contend the warrant was overly broad, lacked specificity, and failed to establish probable cause under the standard required for digital seizure." The moment Dana rose, silence followed. "Your Honor, the chain of custody begins with a sworn affidavit from Janelle Porter, Blackwell's own compliance officer, who disclosed the location of Vault Delta as an off-ledger data repository used to circumvent transparency. We submitted her full interview, under seal. She walked slowly toward the exhibit stand, holding up a manila envelope. Second, the warrant was signed by a sitting federal judge. Your peer based on cumulative probable cause, including the synced footage provided by Miss Ruth Miles, corroborated statements from Miss Liam Hart, and an internal death ledger authored by Dr. Lena Hamilton. That ledger, incidentally, was already being reviewed by HHS in a separate whistleblower complaint. Then she removed a smaller object wrapped in gauze. But more importantly, the contents of Vault Delta were not our only source. She placed the object on the evidence screen, a blood-stained medical wrap carefully labeled and sealed. Your Honor, this was recovered from the effects of Dr. Hamilton. Inside was a micro SD card. It contains audio of a strategy meeting between Celeste Vance, CFO Kurt Nelson, and Director of Risk Management Alina Grant. The topic: how to adjust mortality outcomes for vulnerable test subjects to minimize payout liabilities in civil litigation. She pressed play. A muffled voice emerged. Look, the insurers only ask for final diagnosis, not what caused the arrhythmia. If it's marked as asthma-related, that keeps us under the 2% litigation threshold. Another voice chimed in. And if it spikes over, Celeste Vance's voice, calm and clinical, then we bury Vault Delta and call it cyber sabotage. Easy. The judge exhaled sharply through her nose, her hand instinctively reaching for the gavel, not to strike it, but to steady her balance. When defense attempted to argue, the SD card was an unauthorized wiretap. Dana had already anticipated it. It was hidden voluntarily by a deceased whistleblower inside a sealed medical sling, not collected by federal agents, but turned over posthumously by his widow. It falls squarely within the bounds of posthumous declaration and chain of custody standards. Furthermore, it corroborates existing data gathered diligently through a properly executed warrant. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Judge Morris flipped through her legal pad, then turned toward the defendant's table. Motion to suppress the Vault Delta evidence. Denied. Motion to suppress witness testimony. Denied. Motion to disqualify posthumous recordings. Denied. The court finds sufficient legal precedent and procedural compliance to allow the contested evidence into the prosecutorial record. Whitford Carr's face didn't flinch, but Celeste Vance, sitting behind him, turned her head just slightly to look at Amira, seated 3 rows behind the prosecution. Her expression was blank at first. Then her lips parted, and in a whisper sharp enough to slice air, she said, "You killed your own?" Amira didn't blink, but something inside her churned. The memory of Miguel's body falling between the server racks, his blood soaking into her shirt, his breath catching one last time to save hers. It struck harder now, under fluorescent light and polished wood, than it had in the storm of combat. She said nothing in return. She didn't need to. The judge adjourned the motion hearing, ruling in favor of the prosecution on all substantial points. But as Celeste was led out under guard, the cameras caught only one thing: her glare. Not at the press, not at the prosecutors, but at Amira, as though it were personal, because it was. With motions ruled and admissibility secured, the court moved swiftly. The criminal proceedings were formally split. Roy Caldwell would stand trial alone on civil rights and attempted murder charges. Celeste Vance and Blackwell Pharmaceuticals faced federal racketeering and healthcare fraud, and Chief Langley, alongside Senator Harrison, would be tried for conspiracy, obstruction, and abuse of power. The stage was now set, and the entire country was watching. The courthouse was older than most, its red brick facade weathered by time, protests, and southern humidity. Inside, the courtroom held a quiet tension, as if the very walls remembered every verdict handed down with a hint of bias. The jury sat in 2 neat rows, a rare mix of black, Latino, white, and Asian faces, young and old, skeptical and attentive, chosen carefully to reflect the community they served. But justice, as always, didn't come down to appearances. It came down to evidence and truth. Caldwell sat at the defense table, his posture rigid, his mouth clenched as if perpetually bracing for something he couldn't control. His suit fit poorly. His eyes shifted often, not from guilt but from arrogance clashing with fear. He had once walked into rooms like this with swagger, demanding compliance with nothing more than a badge. Today that badge was gone. What remained was a man facing the immense weight of the law he had twisted to his will. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Mallory James, a woman with a steel presence and a calm, piercing voice, opened with no theatrics, no pleas to morality or outrage, just facts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this is not just a case about a man who assaulted a woman. This is about a sworn officer acting outside the bounds of his authority, who used a weapon, intimidation, and systemic fear to silence a voice he didn't want heard. And that voice was black. That voice was pregnant. That voice had every right to exist. Then she pointed directly at Caldwell, who stared ahead without blinking. And this man tried to erase it. The defense rose with a contrasting tone. Measured, cautious. My client was responding to a perceived threat, the attorney offered. He acted within his training under the assumption that force was necessary. And yes, the victim retaliated. She struck him. Is that the behavior of someone entirely innocent? But the jury wasn't there to evaluate emotion. They were there to weigh truth. The first witness, Ruth Miles. Ruth's testimony came gently, her voice cracking only once. She described the events of that morning. The thundering knock, the chaos outside her window, the moment she saw Caldwell shove Amira to the ground and press his weapon into her ribs. Then she described the moment she realized she had forgotten to turn off Cloud Sync on her phone. It had uploaded everything. Adia James played the full video, unedited. In the recording, Caldwell's voice echoed across the speakers. Get your hands where I can see them. You people always reach for something. Always got a story. The courtroom shifted. Several jurors blinked. One folded his arms. Caldwell never looked up. The second witness, Liam Hart. Liam was pale and visibly sweating as he took the stand. He admitted to following Caldwell's commands that day out of fear. Not of Amira, but of what would happen if he disobeyed a white officer with a history of retaliation. When asked what Caldwell told him afterward, his voice dropped to a whisper. He said, "Stick to the story." She swung first. She's one of those types who wants attention. The courtroom murmured, a ripple of unease. The judge gave a brief warning. Adia James looked directly at the jury. Coercion isn't just a threat to a witness. It's a threat to the truth itself. The third witness, a forensic analyst. She confirmed that the bruising on Amira's lower back, upper shoulder, and abdomen matched precisely the shape and angle of the standard-issue Blackwell baton. The strike patterns aligned with defensive posturing, consistent with someone shielding their stomach. The recovered weapon, Caldwell's, still bore trace blood fibers. His fingerprints were clear on its handle. The DNA was Amira's. The fourth witness, a phone records analyst, subopinate phone logs, placed Caldwell at the scene minutes before the call to dispatch was even made. More damning, they revealed a text sent to Brooks 2 nights before the incident. Need to make an example. She's the leak. Handle it before it spreads. Finally, Amira's testimony. Amira took the stand with measured grace. She wore no makeup to hide the healing bruises, nor did she alter her voice to seem more composed than she felt. She described the profound fear, not just of being attacked, but of not being believed. She described the moment she kicked Caldwell away, not in anger but in sheer terror, a primal need to protect herself. She spoke of her pregnancy, her unborn child, her oath as an investigator, and what it felt like to realize a uniform didn't always mean protection. Defense attempted to corner her on the use of force. Do you believe kicking an officer is acceptable conduct? The attorney sneered. She didn't flinch. When that officer shoves you to the pavement, pins your arms, and slams a weapon into your back. Yes, I believe surviving is acceptable conduct. Closing arguments. Defense framed the case as a tragic misunderstanding. Adia James framed it as a systemic outcome, not a mistake. She closed with a single, powerful line. If a badge grants a man the right to silence truth through fear, then justice is nothing more than theater. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The forewoman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Roy Caldwell, guilty on all counts. Assault with a deadly weapon, intimidation of a witness, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Caldwell's mouth opened slightly, just once, before his attorney placed a firm hand on his shoulder. The courtroom remained silent, as if the very walls were absorbing the moment with the immense weight it deserved. Though sentencing would come later, after the federal trial concluded, this moment stood as a turning point. For the first time in years, a badge in this town had been judged not by its symbolism, but by its abhorrent actions. Amira didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she turned to Ethan and whispered, "One down." And outside the courthouse, for the first time in decades, the statue of the blindfolded Lady Justice no longer seemed like a mockery. It looked appropriate. The 2 courtrooms, one state, one federal, stood less than 3 miles apart, yet the distance between them had been paved in generations of grief. Now, on a rain-softened morning, both rooms filled with people whose lives had been shaped or shattered by the events surrounding the Blackwell scandal. Victims, families, community members, local journalists, and federal observers packed every available seat. No one came expecting easy answers. They came for accountability. Amira sat in the front row, her hands gently resting on her lap. Her eyes didn't waver. Neither did her voice when her name was called to deliver a victim impact statement. She rose slowly, took a deep breath, and turned toward the men and women whose decisions had once determined the fate of others with careless authority. "My name is Amira Cole," she began, her voice steady. "I'm a federal investigator, a mother-to-be, and a woman who believed that integrity could exist within our systems until it was nearly beaten out of me by men in uniform, by women in boardrooms, by people who used power not to protect, but to profit." Her words didn't rise in volume, but in profound depth. Every sentence sank into the room like a stone into still water. "I am standing here because others can't. Hamilton, the unnamed women who were silenced before they could testify, my unborn child, who nearly died before taking his first breath, and the countless families whose losses were dismissed as side effects or poor luck." She paused, locking eyes with Caldwell. He blinked, but didn't look away. "I didn't survive this to seek vengeance. I'm here for accountability, for every door slammed in our faces, for every record altered, for every lie whispered under the cover of procedure." She returned to her seat as the judge nodded solemnly. Then came the sentences. Roy Caldwell was sentenced first. The judge, a measured man with graying temples and a reputation for strict adherence to both law and decency, spoke without flourish. "Mr. Caldwell, your badge gave you responsibility, not superiority. You used your position to violate civil rights, intimidate witnesses, and assault a woman carrying life within her. This court sentences you to 28 years in state and federal facilities, to be served consecutively. Furthermore, you are permanently barred from ever holding a law enforcement position in any capacity." Gasps met the final clause. Caldwell sat motionless, his jaw tight. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. He didn't Celeste Vance stood, a study in composure, but her eyes flickered when the judge delivered her fate. "Miss Vance," the judge began, "you manipulated scientific data, concealed lethal drug trials, and attempted to suppress federal evidence. You operated under the guise of innovation, while treating human lives as collateral." Her sentence, 35 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all Blackwell assets tied to the study, and establishment of a $180 million restitution fund for families affected by the experimental drug program, most of them Black mothers and their children. As marshals moved to escort her, she turned once to look at Amira. There was no plea for mercy, only a cold, venomous stare. Then she disappeared behind the door. Senator Harrison received 22 years, stripped of all political privileges, and barred for life from holding any elected or appointed office. The court described his crimes: wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud the public, as a betrayal so precise, it could only be committed by someone who knew exactly where the guardrails were and chose to drive through them. Chief Langley, who once led the town's police, with a paternalistic smile and an iron fist behind closed doors, was sentenced to 18 years. More painful, perhaps, was the final condition: the permanent revocation of his pension and retirement benefit. "The law you swore to uphold was never yours to bend," the judge told him, "and now it will not soften your landing." Lieutenant Brooks, who had cooperated late in the investigation, received a 12-year sentence, reduced in part due to his full testimony and assistance in locating the weapons cache used in multiple suppression attempts. His illegally acquired assets were seized, and he was ordered to pay restitution equal to all funds received from private enforcement contracts connected to Blackwell. As for Blackwell Pharmaceuticals, the corporation itself narrowly avoided criminal conviction through a deferred prosecution agreement. But the price was steep: a 10-year federal oversight mandate, appointment of an external compliance officer, and a binding agreement to fund victim reparations, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Amira didn't clap. No one did. This wasn't a day for celebration. It was a day for setting stones right in a wall that had crumbled under too much silence. As the courtroom emptied and sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Amira slipped away quietly to a small memorial table just outside the federal chamber. There, framed in silver, was a photo of Dr. Hamilton smiling, blissfully unaware of the storm that would follow. Amira knelt, pulling from her coat a single white carnation. She laid it gently before the frame, then whispered through clenched emotion, "We did it! We really did." Outside, a press conference gathered steam, but Amira didn't stop. Her next destination lay beyond the courthouse, towards City Hall, where the consent decree hearings were just beginning. The police department she once feared was now the subject of a sweeping federal overhaul. Justice had begun, but reform was just getting started. City Hall's chamber no longer echoed with avoidance or indifference. On this particular afternoon, the room pulsed with something rare: accountability. The Department of Justice had just signed the consent decree, a binding agreement that would overhaul the city's law enforcement practices from the foundation upward. Effective immediately, Chokeholds were banned without exception. All officers were required to wear body cameras with live feed access, and a new independent oversight board staffed not by insiders, but by civilians, would monitor use of force incidents. Amira stood near the back, quietly observing, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. Every reform passed felt less like a political act, and more like a solemn vow whispered between the living and the dead. Across the aisle, Dana nodded, her arms folded. The mayor, no longer posturing but truly present, spoke into the microphone with a humility earned only through public reckoning. Let today mark the beginning of a new era, not because we were forced to change, but because we chose not to forget. But it wasn't just laws that shifted. At the ribbon cutting for the new Lena Hamilton Maternal Justice Center, Amira watched as Ruth and Liam stood side by side. The tension of past betrayals softened, though never entirely erased. Liam, eyes lowered, addressed the gathered community. I lied, he said, his voice unsteady. I feared what would happen to me if I told the truth. But fear isn't a shield, it's a chain, and I'm breaking it now. He had accepted a sentence of community service, to be carried out not in silence, but shoulder to shoulder with the city's legal outreach team. Amira, from across the crowd, gave him a faint nod, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. A few blocks away, nestled between the courthouse and the old district library, the city's newest park bore a plaque beneath the sycamores, Lena Hamilton Memorial Grove. For those who saw what others wouldn't and spoke anyway. Under the filtered sunlight, children ran past the flowers, laughter blooming where once there had only been loss. And then the moment. Amira gasped, sharp but steady. Ethan, ever watchful, caught her arm before she could even say the words. It's time, she whispered, the first contraction rippling through her body like a signal from within. At dawn, the hospital corridor fell silent. The bustle of monitors, nurses, and whispered instructions softened beneath the first light pouring through the window pane. Amira lay in bed, her hair damp with effort, her gaze locked on the small bundle resting on her chest. He had 10 tiny fingers, a furrowed brow like his father's, and lungs that had arrived already proclaiming justice, in their own way. They named him Miguel. There was no debate, no hesitation. The name was etched in Amara's heart the moment she watched him fall. Unarmed, unflinching, loyal, until his final breath. Miguel had taken a bullet meant for her, and left behind not vengeance but clarity. The truth was worth bleeding for. Janelle arrived first, carrying a small bouquet, her eyes swollen with tears she wouldn't apologize for. Dana followed, placing a hand gently on Amara's shoulder. You know, she murmured, state lawmakers are already revising custody and restraint protocols for pregnant women under arrest. The conversation you started, Amira cut in, soft but firm, didn't start with me. It started with every woman who didn't live to speak. The news chimed in from her phone. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals had accepted a court-enforced ethical compliance framework, a new chapter of oversight, transparency, and patient consent. For once, it wasn't just PR, it was law. Outside the room, a small crowd from the neighborhood gathered. Nurses, former victims, even retired officers who had joined the reform task force. They waited not for a speech, but to see that something had survived, that something good had been born from the wreckage. Ethan leaned in, brushing his finger across Miguel's sus cheek. Justice doesn't end with a sentence, he said, his voice low. It begins with how we live after. As if on cue, the door opened slightly and a camera flash burst. Then another. Amira didn't flinch. She didn't pose. She simply held her child, framed in the warm glow of morning. To the world, it was the image of a survivor. But to those who had walked the journey with her, it was more, a woman who had confronted a system stacked against her and emerged not broken, but holding the future in her arms. The photo would be reprinted in dozens of papers, shared across neighborhoods, placed in classrooms and offices. But Amira never let herself believe the fight was over, because the arc of justice doesn't bend itself. It's pulled by every truth spoken, every secret exposed, every hand that refuses to let go. And while this chapter may close, the watch goes on with us. Tonight's story began with a sidewalk humiliation and a single refusal to bow. Amira, 7 months pregnant, met a badge-turned-weapon and answered with dignity, precision, and a promise to protect the life inside her. From that moment, the road opened, Ethan at her side, Janelle breaking the silence, Hamilton lighting the way, and Miguel stepping between a bullet and a future. Their courage ripped open Vault Delta, unmasked a machine that priced black mothers as data points, and turned evidence into justice. Caldwell, Vance, Harrison, and Langley faced the law. Restitution funds, oversight, and a consent decree followed. A clinic now bears Lena Hamilton's name. At dawn, baby Miguel arrived, proof that survival can become stewardship. If systems can be built to harm, They can be rebuilt to heal, line by line, policy by policy, neighbor by neighbor. Which part of this fight will you carry into your own street? If the story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us, because accountability isn't an ending. It's a daily practice, and every voice makes the sirens quieter for tomorrow. Pregnant woman fights back, exposes dark conspiracy. Racist cop humiliated. She uncovers shocking cover-up. Her kick ignites a war against a secret organization.